Hi everybody, here is a video that provides you guys with a quick overview of punishment. So your objectives for the video on your left and our agenda, we are going to talk about the definition of punishment, talk about level 3 strategies, level 4 strategies, the advantages of punishment, the problems of punishment, and then some ethical considerations that you guys need to take into account if you are going to implement punishment procedures. So before we get started, remind yourself of our 4 levels of ways to, or strategies to arrange an environment to decrease behavior. First is level 1, so you want to implement some type of reinforcement-based strategy. If those strategies don't work, you can go to level 2, so terminating reinforcement or extinction. And then if that doesn't work, that's when you want to get into levels 3 and 4, which are your punishment procedures. Level 3 is not as intense. Level 4 is the most intense and the most intrusive punishment procedures. But you really want to make sure that you've gone through all of your reinforcement-based strategies before you result to levels 3 and 4. Okay, so with punishment, you have, similar to reinforcement, you have both positive and negative punishment. With punishment in general, a response occurs, and there's a consequence after the response. So positive punishment, an aversive stimulus is presented. Negative punishment, a pleasant stimulus is removed. And then both of these, the future probability of the response is going to decrease. So the punishment refers to the future probability of the response decreasing, which happens with both positive and negative. And then positive, an aversive stimulus is presented, and negative, a pleasant stimulus is removed. So for example, with positive punishment, if you have maybe you have a kid who talks back to their mom and therefore they get more chores, and so that would be an aversive stimulus that's presented, and therefore they stop talking back to their mom. That would be an example of positive punishment. Negative punishment, maybe you have a kid that talks back to their mom and their TV gets removed or their phone gets removed, and therefore they don't talk back to their mom anymore. So both of those examples, same behavior. One an example of positive punishment, they got more chores. One example of negative punishment, they got something that they liked removed. And both of those, if they are punishment, they will decrease the future probability of the response. Okay, with use of punishment, just some things to keep in mind. Our technical definition of punishment is different than the everyday definition of punishment. So our definition is very technical. We are talking about a procedure that decreases behavior, whereas the everyday definition talks about when people say punishment has a really negative connotation. Oftentimes people think about aversive stimuli, harmful stimuli and us harming the kids and things like that. And that's just not the case. Our ABA definition is technical, very different than the everyday definition of punishment. Also, whenever we say aversive, that doesn't equal painful. So when we're talking about an aversive stimulus, remember, we're always looking at the effects on behavior. So our definition of an aversive stimulus is a functional definition. It's a stimulus that decreases the future probability of a response. So it doesn't equal painful. It's just a stimulus that's going to, decrease the future probability of a response. So we're always looking at effects on behavior. Punishment is actually commonly used. It's commonly used in the educational system. It's commonly used in everyday life. It's commonly used in parenting. It's commonly used in the workforce. So we use punishment a lot more than we want to admit. Our definition of punishment in ABA. And it also commonly occurs as a result of our interactions with the natural environment. You tell your friend something and they give you a weird look, or you tell a joke and people give you a weird look and tell you that it's not funny. Well, you're not going to tell that joke again. And so your behavior in telling that joke has decreased, and that would be punishment. So This happens all the time. It allows us to know what what behaviors get reinforced, what behaviors we should engage in, what behaviors we shouldn't engage in, and it kind of guides our behaviors. But regardless of that, if you are actually going to program it deliberately into your treatment, that can be a little different. So be careful of that. If you're programming it into your behavior plan or things like that, then you need to make sure you have informed consent. You need to make sure that everybody's on board. You need to make sure that you have a whole team that makes sure, especially with level 4, that the benefits outweigh the risks. So keep all that in mind, because just the lay definition has that negative connotation. You might need to maybe not use the word punishment, or talk about it in a way that the parents and everybody else understands what you're doing and that you're not actually harming the kid. Okay, let's talk about some level 3 strategies. Level 3 is the removal of desirable stimuli. So these are going to be your negative reinforcement. This is going to be a negative reinforcement contingency. Sorry, negative punishment contingency. With level 3, one technique is what we call a response cost. So this is when you're going to remove a reinforcer. Remember, with negative punishment, the kid already has, or the learner already has, something that they like. They have a reinforcer, and you're essentially going to remove that reinforcer contingent on a response. So the behavior costs something. This happens all the time to us in life. We speed and we get a speeding ticket, and they fine us. So money is a huge reinforcer. We like having money, and when we get fined, that behavior costs us something. Literally, it costs us $100 or $25, whatever your ticket is worth. And so you get some of your money removed contingent on you speeding. In the educational setting, you can use response costs. They use it a lot with token boards. So we've talked about token boards in the past. So, or token economies. And if you have kind of early learners, you might actually have token boards where you can Velcro the tokens on there. If you have later learners, such as, junior high or even high school, or a lot of times you can use tickets or poker chips or even money, fake money. Kids love. And so basically you can do this a couple different ways. You can, they come into your classroom and they have $10 of fake money or whatever it is. And if they engage in inappropriate behavior, then they have to give some of that money to you. So they lose money. The behavior costs something. Early learners, if they come in with 5 tokens already on their token board, they engage in inappropriate behavior and you take a token away. So they already have the reinforcer, and if they engage in the problem behavior, it gets taken away. A couple things to note: you need to have an effective reinforcer. So remember, with your token boards, they are going to exchange them for something that they really want. So if they don't want that backup reinforcer, then they're not going to care if they're losing their tokens. So find something that they really, really want. It's better if it's immediate. So right after they engage in the problem behavior, take away whatever the cost is, the token or the fake money, whatever that is. Make sure that you don't violate their rights. So you can take away tokens, you can't take away their food or anything like that. And it also has shown to be really effective. When you do a punishment procedure, you really want to have some type of reinforcement built in. So you want to use it with differential reinforcement. So if they engage in the correct behavior, you want to make sure that you're reinforcing that. You don't want to decrease the problem behavior or a challenging behavior and not teach them a way to get what they want in a more appropriate way. So a lot of times with token boards and response costs, you want to have a system where if they engage in appropriate behaviors, they can actually earn tokens. And that way, if they come in with $10 and they lose $2, they know that if they engage in an appropriate behavior, they can actually earn their money or their tokens back. So keep those things in mind. Also, if you have kids, if you are using the token system and you're going to implement a response cost procedure, you need to figure out, is the child okay with giving up their tokens? Are they going to argue with you? You don't want to get in an argument match with a kid. It can go on and on and on. So if you have kids that, they engage in inappropriate behavior, and say you're using money, fake money, and you say, okay, hand me $2 of your money, and they hand it to you and they don't argue or it doesn't create a scene, then hey, great. But if you have kids that are like, no, I'm not going to give you that money. I didn't really engage in that behavior. You didn't make it clear, and they're going to sit there and argue with you. You need to be careful about what tokens you use. So you might want to use maybe a point system or something like that where you can control taking away the tokens, and that way you don't get into this kind of arguing match with the learners and the kids. You don't want to do that. All right, another strategy of level 3 is timeout. So timeout, you're removing somebody from a reinforcing environment for a short period of time. And there are two different types of timeout, exclusionary and non-exclusionary. So exclusionary, you actually exclude them from the activity. You can put them in a separate room, but you don't have to. Another example is you can keep them in the room, but turn them around. I remember when I was in elementary school, we had to go to the wall and put our nose against the wall. That would be an example of exclusionary timeout. Non-exclusionary, you take them away from the activity, but they're still in the room. They can still watch the activity and things like that. And there are different types of these, different versions of exclusionary and non-exclusionary, and you guys have some documents and information about that in your module. Remember that timeout should be brief. So this is not, you don't send a kid a timeout and leave them there for the rest of the class period. It's very brief. They realize, hey, I engage in this behavior. I don't get to participate in the activity, and put them there for a couple minutes and then bring them back to the activity. It needs to occur immediately following the behavior. So there doesn't need to be a lot of talking in timeout. You don't need to tell the kid the reason, anything like that. It can be, they will figure out the contingency really quickly if it happens immediately. So they hit another kid, immediately they go to timeout and they learn, hey, if I engage in that behavior, then this happens to me, and you really get a clear contingency. Make sure that the timeout environment is safe. And the key thing with timeout is that the environment from which the person is removed from must be reinforcing. So they really want to participate in that activity or in that environment. If they want to escape from the environment, then timeout is not appropriate, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if you remove them from an environment that's not reinforcing, then they'll want to stay in that timeout environment for the rest of the time. So it is effective if they want to be in that environment and it's really reinforcing. Parents have a lot of trouble with this. They send the kid engages in problem behavior and they send them to their room. Well, a lot of times their room has toys and it's fun, so it actually doesn't function like they want it to. With timeout, you always want to use it with a differential reinforcement procedure. So when the kid comes back from timeout, if they engage in appropriate behavior, you want to reinforce it as much as you can. So they really learn, hey, this is an appropriate behavior. This is what I'm getting. When I engage in this activity, I get attention. I get that tangible, whatever it is that I want. And so you give them a chance to actually earn the reinforcer that they want just for more appropriate behavior. And then do not use this for escape maintain behavior. So this is where that function really comes into play. You really want to go through that function-based assessment, figure out the function of the challenging behavior before you implement. We talked about this with the extinction video. Before you implement extinction, before you go to level 3 and implement a punishment procedure. If the kid wants to escape from the environment and you put them in timeout, you're actually reinforcing the behavior. So, and this happens a lot in the educational setting. So the kid will engage in behavior, they go to timeout, and when you start taking data, you're seeing that the behavior is actually increasing. So in that case, it's possible that the function of the behavior is actually escape, and timeout is actually allowing them to escape from the problem behavior. And so that means that timeout is not a punishment procedure because it's not decreasing behavior. It's actually a negative reinforcement procedure. So keep that in mind. All right, level 4 should be the last level that you go to. Level 4 is where we get the bad rap with regards to punishment because you're presenting an aversive stimulus contingent on a behavior. Now, this happens a lot in the educational setting, but remember, an aversive stimulus doesn't mean a harmful stimulus. For us, in behavior analysis, it means a stimulus that decreases the future probability of the behavior. Remember, it's all about the effects on behavior. But regardless, this should be last resort. You should be really careful if you get to level 4. So there's a couple of main strategies that you can use in level 4. The first one is overcorrection. And this constitutes of positive practice or restitution. So positive practice is used a lot with academic skills. So with positive practice, they engage in an incorrect behavior, you make them practice it, and then that's where you get the correction. And then you make them practice it a couple more times, which is where you get the overcorrection. So they misspell a word, you have them spell it right, and then spell it right 10 more times. If they complete a math fact wrong, you have them complete it correctly, and then do it 10 or 15 more times. Restitution is where if they damage the environment in any way, or they mess up the environment, they restore the environment to where it was before they damaged it, and then they make it even better. So say they write on a wall. They clean their writing off of that wall, and then they clean all of the other walls. Say they put gum underneath the desk. They clean their gum off, and then they clean the gum off of all the other desks in the room. They knock over a desk, they pick up their desk, and then they organize all of the other desks and make sure that they're lined up correctly, or however the teacher has the desk in the room. The other technique is aversive stimulation. And this is where you're actually, this is where the ethics come in and things like, well, the other part has ethics as well, but this is the main part of where we get kind of the bad rap for presenting harmful stimuli. And so there's been some things in the past that have not been appropriate. And this is where you really want to make sure if you're going to present an aversive stimulus that the benefits outweigh the risks. And there are some aversive stimuli that are more, that you need to ethically consider a little bit more than others. So, all these have been used in the past: ice cube, sour lemon juice shock, water spray, noise, things like that. The more common one that's typically used in the educational setting are your reprimands. So with reprimands, whenever you guys administer reprimands, because this happens all the time in educational setting, in the classroom, you need to make sure that you make eye contact with the student. And a lot of times it's been shown to be more successful if you're actually closer to the student and just address that student. So you don't need to be loud, and you don't need to let the whole class hear that you said no to a student. You can get close to the student, tell them no quietly, and make sure that they make eye contact with you. And that's a really good, effective way to present a reprimand. All right, so people tend to use level 4 tactics or presenting that aversive stimuli all the time. And there's a couple of reasons. And one reason is because presenting aversive consequences has a really quick effect. So it very quickly decreases the problem behavior. It also allows kids to really clearly discriminate what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. And it also visually illustrates the consequences. And so other students that are watching clearly know, hey, if I engage in that behavior, that's what's going to happen to me. So that level 4, those presenting aversive stimuli strategies, can be really, really effective. They can decrease the problem behavior really quickly, and so very effective, especially if they're used consistently. The problems with them, though, there are a lot of side effects to extinction. A lot of times you get emotional reactions. So when you implement punishment, you might get some aggression as well. Or you might get some escape and avoidance. So if you have a teacher that is always implementing punishment, then a lot of times kids will try to escape or avoid that teacher, especially if the reason for the punishment isn't clear. If there's a clear reason why you engage in a behavior and you receive an aversive stimulus, then you don't get so much escape and avoidance. But if that's not clear, kids will learn to escape that teacher or escape that person that's administering the punishment. I don't know if you guys have ever seen, I know sometimes kids run away from their parents, or they see a teacher that's always providing punishment, and they see that teacher down at the end of the hallway, and they will go back the other way and go down a different hallway or avoid that teacher's classroom, which is what you don't want as a teacher. Also, the person that is providing the punishment, although it's positive punishment for the kid, it's negative reinforcement for the person implementing it, because it very quickly stops the problem behavior. The problem behavior represents an aversive situation, and so if you as a teacher implement a punish procedure or implement an aversive stimulus, and the removal of that problem behavior, and it removes the problem behavior, that's a negative reinforcement contingency for you. So you're going to be more likely to administer an aversive stimulus in the future, and that's a slippery slope downhill. There's a big potential for abuse, and that you can implement a little bit of an aversive stimulus, and then it gets bigger and bigger and more intense and more intense. So keep that in mind. If you implement punishment, the kids will see you and they'll model it. So you're their model as a teacher. So if you are implementing punishment, kids are going to see that. They're going to imitate that as well. Can't remember if we talked about Bandura and his Bobo doll study, but he did a really cool study, one of our classic ones in psychology, where he had the simplest explanation is he had two groups of kids come in. There are more conditions as well, but kids in two conditions. One condition, they watched a lady interact with a Bobo doll. It's kind of a blow-up doll, and she was really nice to the Bobo doll, and she played with it. And in the other condition, the kids saw that same lady, but she was really mean to the Bobo doll. She verbally abused him, hit him, kicked him, things like that. And after that, the kids in both conditions got a chance to go in and interact with the Bobo doll, and the kids interacted with the Bobo doll the same way that they saw the adult interact. So the kids in the condition where they saw the adult interact really nicely, they were really nice to the Bobo doll, but the condition where the kids saw the adult interact in a really mean way, hitting him, saying mean things to him, they actually engaged in the same behaviors. So that observational learning is huge. Kids are watching you. You're their model. They're going to imitate what you do. All right, wrap this up. A couple of ethical considerations for you guys with regards to punishment. You always want to use it concurrently with differential reinforcement. So if you're going to decrease an inappropriate behavior or challenging behavior, then you need to teach that kid a behavior that they can get the reinforcer for. Remember, that behavior serves some function, and so if you're going to decrease that behavior, teach them an appropriate behavior so that they can get what they want. So use it concurrently with differential reinforcement. Always collect your data. So if you're going to use a punishment procedure, there's a lot of side effects that go along with that. There's a lot of ethical considerations. Collect your data. Make sure that it's being effective and that you have the data to show that. You don't want to keep implementing a punishment procedure if it's not effective. So that's your accountability. That's why we collect data. Make sure that it's safe, that you have all your safety issues figured out before you implement it. And make sure that the staff, the teacher, the therapist, whoever is implementing the punishment procedures, that they are well trained and they're implementing it like they're supposed to be. And then make sure that you are reviewing the data, you are reviewing the techniques and the strategies with the parents and the principal and everybody on the IEP team, and also that you have informed consent as well. So, all right, we talked about definition of punishment, We talked about those level three strategies. Those are your negative punishment strategies, so your response cost, your timeout. We talked about level 4 strategies. Those are your positive punishment strategies, so actually presenting aversive stimuli and then your overcorrection. We talked about advantages of punishment, and then we talked about the problems and the side effects of punishments. And then we wrapped it up with just a couple of ethical considerations if you guys are going to implement punishment procedures. So, all right, guys, that's it. If you have any questions as you're going through this, then please email me. Thanks for listening, guys.